in this little bit here, we're just going to quickly go in a little bit further into the idea of peer review again and how that can impact how people feel about science. So, of course, peer review is supposed to be a check of the quality of the research, the fact that the person is trying to, whatever claims the researcher is doing are actually correct. And of course, in most cases here, the idea goes that the author submits the article, the editor of the journal looks at it, that's sent to reviewers who should be people who are part of that field, who understand what the person's writing about. Those editors may send it back and say there's further revisions, and then the author can go through and do that again. And then as long as everyone's happy, then it's accepted and it's published. Now, of course, that does cause a few little problems. So when we're talking about journals, we're often most people will think about some of the print journals, but there's many online journals that are now publishing research. And of course, some of these articles, even if they are in quite reputable things like The Lancet or Nature or anything like that, sometimes things don't go exactly correct. Now, when COVID started, this article here caused a bit of kerfuffle in the United States because this research was then used by people in certain parts of America and unfortunately in Australia to suggest that this anti-malarial drug, hydroxychloroquine, could actually be used to treat COVID. And there was some initial research that was done. It was published, but then soon after, people looked at the research, tried to replicate the results, and they couldn't do it. And so in this case here, the article was then retracted because it could not be repeated. And in some ways, even though some could argue that the peer review process isn't working in this case, it still is, because even after an article has been published, if it's retracted, then it's basically seen as not being correct. Of course, the most famous article for this is this one here that appeared in The Lancet in 1998. It's got a nice big title: Allele lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, nonspecific colitis, and pervasive development disorder in children. This is a very long-winded way of saying or claiming that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine causes autism. And this article was retracted because, again, once it was done and once it was published, people looked at the data and went back and checked everything. And if you look down to the bottom there, you can even see that the methodology for this, even without looking at the entire thing here, this was a bit of research done on 12 children. And so unfortunately since then, particularly in places like the United States, it's taken hold. And there is the whole anti-vax movement has essentially come about because of one article, one scientific bit research that was done on 12 children. Now, of course, you can also have a look there. There are websites like this one here, Retraction Watch, which goes and has a look at all the retractions. And that's a really important thing for the scientific process to look at as well, because unless a reputable journal removes their information, it may stay online and people look at it. Of course, it does also cause a problem because, of course, once a scientific study is released, often institutions will also have press releases. These go to news organisations, and news organisations always try and fill space. And so particularly in the popular media, they'll report something and they won't necessarily check things up. And so, you get things here. In 2019, there was some research that was published and it got a huge amount of media at the time, that younger generations are growing horns in the back of their head. And it was looking at x-rays and saying, well, there's obviously a problem because all these teenagers are getting these little bone spurs in the back of around their neck. And of course, once that research was looked at, it was found that it actually wasn't correct. And there was a lot of bias in the way that the sampling and that was done. Of course, this also causes problems when you look at certain news media organisations. Fox News gets pilloried a little bit here because, something like this, 2019, and most of their coverage was saying the climate change wasn't real. And of course, in places like the United States, there's even further climate denial. A huge amount of money goes into that.